Welcome to NeedleXChange, conversations on the art of thread. I'm Jamie Chalmers, aka Mr. X-Stitch, and today I'm interviewing Tal Fitzpatrick. Tal is a socially engaged artist and craftivist whose quilts and textile works carry both personal and political meaning. In this episode, we talk about her early influences, from her grandmother's politically charged textiles to her own PhD in craftivism. Oh yes. Tal reflects on how disaster recovery communities inspired her to pursue art as activism, and she shares stories behind some of her first major projects, including the PM Please Quilt and the beginnings of the UDHR quilt collaboration. If you enjoyed NeedleXChanges 71 and 72 with Betsy Greer, you will really enjoy my chat with Tal as we get deep into the power of craft and community. I've known of Tal's work for a very long time, and so it was great to finally chat with her. And this is a good one. This is a long one. We'll be back next week with the second half of this. And if you enjoy this show, please do share a review on your favourite platform, as that will help more people understand the power of craftivism. We'll be back next week with the second half of the chat. So until then, enjoy the show. Tell me about your festival then. Tell me what you've been up to lately.
Yeah, so here on the Gold Coast, where I live and work, we have an annual arts festival called Bleach. We're a beach town, so I think it comes from that. But me and my collaborator, Melissa Spratt, have been working on a project for a couple of years now called The City Speaks Softly. It's a way for us to think through how our work could work in public space. And a way, Melissa's work is really amazing. She does work about being a highly sensitive person, and she works in finger knitting, and she's done this amazing body of work where she kind of like finger knitted all the questionnaire questions that they ask you to get a bit of a diagnostic to whether you're a highly sensitive person. So she does these really beautiful, soft, gentle works. Whereas my work, it's a bit more like shouty, angry feminist vibes. So this collaboration, we came together to kind of think about like how could we work together in public space and think about how craft can soften public space, and then think and talk through. It's a socially engaged project. So we worked with community members and did a public workshop where we invited people to reflect on how they feel in public space, how they feel at different times of day, how they feel if they're alone. And we got them to generate a bunch of text in response to a prompt that asked if the city could speak, what would it say? And out of that, we selected a range of text for 5 banners. So we Melissa finger knitted the letters, and I quilted the backgrounds, and we had those printed onto street pole banners, and they've been put up around the city during the festival. So they're in a couple of different suburbs by the beach, near Hodder, which is our like arts precinct. And yeah, they're really fun and beautiful, and they say things like, a paradise for who? Text me when you get home. I'll leave the light on for you. Your comfort matters, and I'm so glad you're here. And they're kind of like a subtle rainbow, and I chose to make the I'm so glad you're here banner using the Trans Pride flag colours. So there's kind of like subtle works in there that you can kind of read if you really start to work and read into the work, but mostly it's just something that audiences will maybe happen to notice out in public space. I think we train ourselves to ignore street pole banners and street signs because they're normally somewhere where we're being advertised to, or for some reason here on the Gold Coast, most of them say like Gold Coast and then have a photo of the beach on them.
In case you forgot where you were.
In case you have amnesia. So I think we're really interested in that. Like, how do you surprise people in public space, and how do you subvert spaces that are commercial and use them as a way to kind of be gentle and kind?
Yeah. That's a really interesting concept. It made me think of Luke Haynes and his girlfriend Nicole did projects where they did like quilts that had affirmations on them, or
yes, and left them in public space.
Yeah. So I guess but that's kind of humans talking to humans, isn't it? I like the idea here of the town talking back to you, or you having that kind of connection with the environment. Is that the first time you've done something like that?
This is the first time that either of us have really put our work in public space, for sure. I've marched with my banners, with my protest banners, as part of like activist marches through Melbourne in particular. So they've been in public space in that way, but not as like public art. I'm making quotation marks. So yeah, and it was interesting for us because our textiles obviously don't work that great in public space for durational periods of time because they're like not super weatherproof. So we were thinking, okay, well, where do banners kind of exist already, which is how we kind of came to the street pole banners. So they already like speak to the medium in some way. They can already kind of relate to that. So having the works printed onto those, I think, was interesting. And then I think the architecture itself of street lights and why we have those, and that architecture as a way to create safety in public, which is what a lot of the street lights were for in the first place, is to like improve safety in the city. So I think they have that nice, from a feminist lens of thinking about how safe women in particular feel in public space. They're an interesting sight.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? It's just applying another layer of safety. It's almost like there's a kind of layer of emotional safety as well as a sort of environmental safety because, yeah, as well as knowing that you can be seen, you get a feeling someone's looking out for you at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. So the phrases that came up, they were generated by the participants in your workshops?
Yeah, so we kind of led them through. We did a kind of 2-hour workshop where we taught everyone to finger knit. We had conversations like on butcher's paper in response to like some prompts. And then we had them talk to each other about things like what makes you feel like you belong. And then we had like a piece of paper that we gave them at the end for them to write like a written response. And we knew that we were doing them for street polls. So we were like, keep them into phrases that are like under 5 words or so. And so people wrote us all kinds of little responses and we picked out. So there was about 30 people in those workshops and we kind of like looked for things that came up again and again. So the word paradise came up quite a lot. Again, the Gold Coast is like a leisure destination kind of place. This is where you come to holiday if you don't live here. So it's got this kind of idea of like being a paradise, but then this kind of tension of like a paradise for who. That kind of tension came up. And the city itself, thinking about the city having a voice and what it sees of our lives and what it overhears, and then like that kind of tension again of public space and safety. So for us here, the cost of living is such an issue. So these banners are kind of hanging up in some places where the real estate is actually really unachievable for people now, particularly young people. So that question, then you can read it in all kinds of ways in the context of where it is in place.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? It's sort of like you say, there's a certain amount of subversion there, and to the point that we'll get onto later, isn't it? The nature of it being kind of textiles, kind of bedded in with the environment. It's not obvious subversion. It's not obvious critique. It's just this quiet voice.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I often think of my work as kind of like a Trojan horse.
Yeah.
So the way I kind of think about how these works operate is they're kind of soft and beautiful and unassuming and non-threatening always. And you can like house within that shell some pretty sophisticated critique. It does ask a lot more of the audience to read between those lines and to read into it, to kind of like unlock that. But I think it's got an amazing potential, particularly in a moment in history where protesting and speaking out is getting more dangerous and we're seeing more censorship happen, particularly all across the board, but within social media platforms and within the arts and with the way that things are being funded at the moment. I think craftivism is a really interesting space where we still have a lot of room to move.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I listened to an audiobook a while ago called Pitch, which is by a guy, I think his name is Oren Klaff, and I will undoubtedly have got that wrong because that's what usually happens. And he says that whenever you pitch an idea at someone, the first response is quite a primitive one. It's like our lizard brain responses. And a lot of the time we just want to go, no, just get it out of the way, whatever, and that primal response to have a sophisticated conversation / argument with someone, you've got to get past the primitive to engage the more nuanced forms of thinking that will then be willing to negotiate. And one of the problems I think you get when you see these big activist movements where people are gluing themselves to buildings or stopping traffic or whatever is for the majority of people, the primal instinct is all that they're going to get. And they're never going to win. You're never going to win really by barricading something off because you're going to piss more people off than are really going to understand the message. And that's why the nuance of what you're talking about probably works better because it's kind of like peripheral understanding, isn't it? You're seeing something, but in the corner of your mind, your brain's picking up on these other messages. And that's probably the corner of your mind that's more willing to consider them and take them on board.
I think the antagonism of like direct action activism can be tricky for people and it can be tricky to win people over. But I think it's important and I think there's room for all of it, really. The way I kind of think about it is like, sometimes it's not until you hear about something the like seventh time that it starts to like even register in your mind. And all of a sudden then it feels serendipitous because you heard about it from like 5 different people that have all told you to go watch the same TV show or something. And you're like, oh, well, I guess I will because it's come at me from different directions. And I think sometimes these conversations need to work like that too. So we more people will hear about it because of the disruption sometimes. But then if there's another way that it's opened up in other people's lives or they come across it in other ways, I think that can be part of that softening and that opening up of curiosity.
Yeah, like a pincer approach, I suppose, but it's more than just a pincer or something. I was reminded of Darren Brown, who's a kind of, I don't know what he would be now. He's like a psychologist, but he's also an entertainer. He would also do kind of mind control-y type things. But he'd be the sort of person who would like, if he was trying to make you think a thing, maybe there'd be like a poster in a bus stop of that thing that you wouldn't notice.
Yeah, they're like subliminal suggestions.
Yeah. And I guess in some ways, maybe those are the kind of, like with your banners, there's a layer of that. Now, it feels to me like that's not really the agenda with that. This is very much like the town being affirmative to the people of the town. Am I right?
But there is an aspect of it because there is, particularly with something like text me when you get home. I was having a conversation with the son of the photographer who was helping us document it. And he was like, why would I need to text someone when I get home? Because when I get home, they're already home with me. And I was like, that makes sense if you're like texting your parents and you live with them. But I was like, actually, this is something that a lot of women do with their friends when they go out or they're like, so they don't live together, but they want to make sure that their friends got home safe. And he was like, oh, I didn't know that. So it's like these things that some of us is kind of like embedded knowledge. For other people, it's not. So it's an opportunity to be like, what does that mean? What does it mean I'll leave the light on for you? Like, why would you do that? Who would do that? Or what is it? Why would your comfort matter? Whose comfort? So it can kind of, I hope, be a way to like start asking questions.
Did it at all like reframe your relationship with your town at all? Did it make you see anything differently, or was it a lot of it stuff that sort of logically made sense?
I don't know if it changed my relationship to the city. It was certainly nice because I have lived on the Goldie since I was 8. I was away for about 7 years in Melbourne when I was doing my PhD, but it was like I was quite proud to see my artwork in public space in the place where I grew up and to walk through the like park at Burleigh Headland where I would go as a teenager every weekend, and then to like look up and see the work there was kind of special. So I think that who gets seen and who gets heard in public space, I think is really interesting and something that art and and craftivism is engaging with that idea of who has a voice, and this was a really nice way to feel like we gave some people a voice. We gave the people who were in our workshops a space to be heard, and I think that the text reflects the feeling of a lot of people.
How long are the banners going to stay up for?
All up, they'll be up for just over a month. The festival itself was only 10 days, but banners are up a little bit longer than that.
And have you had any feedback about them yet?
It's funny because there isn't like there's not like an opening exhibition where everyone can like come and see the work and tell us how they think about it. So not as much. We've been sharing the work via social media, and we've got lots of nice responses there. And I've had a few people tell me that they like saw them out in the wild and that it made them feel like warm and fuzzy, which was lovely to hear. But I think most of the people who see this work, I'll never hear from them, I don't think.
That's the in some ways that's the plight of the craftivist, right? Isn't it? You sort of give this stuff away knowing that, I don't know, if you feel good about it, perhaps that will do, because you're not necessarily going to get any further.
But you must have this experience. I think these things come back around in strange ways and over long periods of time. So having kind of been in this space, since like 2014, 2015, I've been around long enough to know that like other projects have come about because people have been involved in some of my projects, or because they saw something that I did that then like empowered them to go away and do their own versions or something. And in this way, which kind of had nothing to do with you, something else was created somewhere else. And I think that's it's great to know that happens, but you don't always get that feedback for sure, and definitely not in the moment.
It's kind of funny, isn't it, it's like now there's a post-punk, like if we were punk, I'm not saying that we were, but now there's post-punk and you're like, hang on a minute, have we been around that long that suddenly there's a post version of us or something? It's
totally.
Just like, wow. Yeah, I've had that a few times. I remember I bumped into someone who'd like bought my book and it had started them on their cross-stitch journey, and it was like 6 years ago, and I was like, and even like that seems like forever or something. It's just bonkers. Let's go all the way back in time, because just remind me what your PhD is in, please.
Yep. So I've got a PhD from the VCA, which is the Victorian College of Art in Melbourne, and my research was about craftivism. So it was about craftivism as a mode of DIY citizenship in particular, and thinking about and when I started my research, there wasn't a lot published about craftivism within academia. I think since then we've kind of seen quite a lot of people writing about craftivism across both the kind of art therapy side of it and more in the fine arts side of it, and even in like kind of sociology. But when I was writing about it, not many people had written in that kind of very formal academic context about it. And I was interested in its efficacy in that question. I think in the early days, there was a lot of, I think this stands to today, I think anything that can be read as girly or feminine or gentle in the way that craftivism can be is very easily dismissed as ineffective or something that is a waste of time or resources. So I was kind of interested in engaging with that criticism and looking at the efficacy of craftivism and how it works and how it works to make change. And I was really interested in looking at it not just as a mode of direct action, but thinking about how it's kind of a stepping stone along a person's journey to engagement, and particularly to an engagement in the kind of everyday practice of democracy. Yeah, so that's what my work was about.
So what I want to do, because we're going to dive into this, but
in
a way, but before that, what I want to do is I want to go further back in time and understand how it came to be that you decided to ended up doing a PhD on that subject. Because the preamble, I think, will be interesting how you got there.
All right. So preamble is, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, but I knew that I had to go to university because I'm a migrant and those are the rules. So I went and did an arts degree here at the local university at Griffith on the Gold Coast. And I did an undergrad and honours and worked in all kinds of mediums. I was more kind of conceptual artist, I guess, and whatever the work was, I used whatever kind of art medium I thought would speak best to that. But at the end of that, I felt like I've got to this place where I felt like maybe art was too self-indulgent and that I needed to like find a way to give back to the community and do work that was more meaningful somehow. And I did a bit of work in the kind of arts and disability space. My older brother lives with a disability and both my parents work in disability, so it's a space that I'm familiar and comfortable with. And I did some work for an organisation that ran arts and music programs for young people with a disability here on the Gold Coast. And then I like weirdly stumbled into a full-time job in Brisbane with Volunteering Queensland, who are the peak body for volunteering in the state. And the job was, we just had some major natural disasters. We had these bunch of floods in 2011 here across southeast Queensland that were really devastating. And there was all this funding kind of pumped into disaster recovery. So I ended up delivering this project called the Natural Disaster Resilience Leadership Project, which was a capacity building program for community leaders in disaster affected areas. And through that work, I ended up going to disaster affected communities all over Queensland, across some sites in New South Wales. I went to Victoria after we had some major bushfires, and I even got to participate in some UNESCO Youth Looking Beyond Disasters forums as a delegate in Christchurch after the earthquakes and in Sendai after the tsunamis, and then back in New Zealand again with a Pacifica-specific group. And we were drafting from a youth perspective recommendations on how to better prepare and recover from disasters. And what I learned from that was that every single community I went to at their like most desperate hour, they'd all turn to the arts as part of their recovery. It was like an immediate human need to find ways to come together, to support one another, to memorialize what had happened, to find reasons to find hope and to find ways to regenerate. And there were just all these amazing art projects happening in all these places where you'd think it'd be the last thing on your mind. And it was just it was a very real world example of the power and value of art and the humanness of art and how central it actually is to our species. And based on that, by that time I'd stopped practicing art because I was working full time, and anyone who manages to sustain their practice and work full time, I take my hats off to them. But it kind of got me to a place where I was like, I would love to go back to my own work with this kind of community development background, this understanding that art actually is really important to our communities, and that it's really empowering, and to find a way to bring that into my own practice. So that's when I went down and started my PhD. I went to the VCA because they had a special research unit dedicated to social practice, and they recognized my community development work as experience, even though I hadn't been practicing for a couple of years as an artist. So that's kind of the only way that I was able to get my foot into the door academically. And about a couple of 6 months to a year into my research, I stumbled across the word craftivism and had this kind of like, aha, I know what I want to be when I grow up moment of like the Venn diagram of my art, my activism, and my community development work just like perfectly intersecting. And I haven't looked back since.
Yeah, like really perfectly intersecting, isn't it? That's amazing. I mean, so it's fascinating what you just said there about, that people use art. I guess it's, I'm just trying to think, it's like a therapeutic tool, isn't it? It goes beyond language, it goes beyond emotion. There are many different ways to do it. Are there any specific examples that you could share?
Yeah, I could give you so many. There's like I guess I'll give you textile ones because we're textile nerds. But I think the key thing to remember is that we're like storytelling creatures, and art is how we tell stories. And in disasters, what we need are stories to bring us hope and bring us together and bring us out of the darkness and give us the strength to rebuild. So one example, I think it was in Toowoomba, a flood-affected community post their recovery. They'd noticed that a lot of the kids in the town were getting really stressed and anxious whenever it rained, and that there was a lot of kind of emotional struggles that young kids were having as a result of having experienced those kind of scary natural disasters. And as part of this big community event kind of fun day that they had, there was this group that had a teddy bear hospital set up so that the kids could come bring a teddy bear or like a toy that needed some repair work to this kind of tent, and there'd be someone there who would help them repair their teddy, but at the same time have conversations with the young people about how their teddy's doing. So how's your teddy feeling? What do you do when he's sad? How do you help him feel better? What makes you feel better when you're worried? How do we help other people when they're sad? And it's just, it could make me cry right now. It's such a beautiful example of this kind of intersection of something very practical, a very practical skill, something that, and then bringing that kind of emotional, social intelligence to that interaction. And then, yeah, there's, I don't know if you have them, but the Red Cross here make trauma teddies. Do you guys have those?
Okay, maybe.
They're like hand-knitted teddies that volunteers make that all the emergency services have ready to give out to people when they're having to respond to emergencies. I have one of those in my Stay Go kit, and they're another beautiful example of the way that we create comfort and connection in these times of disasters. There's lots of memorial projects, obviously. There was a big blacksmithing project that happened post the fires in Victoria, where blacksmiths from all over the world helped the local community create this memorial tree. They all made leaves and sent them over to create this big public sculpture that was a memorial for what had happened. And it was like, yeah, this huge, amazing project. So there's heaps. So much amazing work happening in that disaster recovery space.
Yeah, it's interesting. I sometimes think, like when someone dies, the English language lets us down because you go, sorry, which isn't the word that's right at all. And it makes me feel like something like that, like a crowd-created tree as a memorial, transcends the inadequacies of us being able to say things.
Yeah, or the shrouds or blankets you can make out of people's clothes who've passed away as like a keepsake and a way to keep them physically close and to still hold them and hold their memories. I think, yeah, it gives us so much. It gives us such a practical skill set and kind of tools to do something.
Yeah, and at the same time offers the opportunity for reflection through the production method.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. So your PhD then.
I guess the tiny missing link is like why textiles happened, because before that I hadn't before I started my PhD I hadn't made any textile work. I'd done some embroidery into canvas at some point, but that was about it. But my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, Tal Fitzpatrick, was a textile artist who made these kind of large-scale applique figurative works that combined some painting and drawing techniques. So I've always been surrounded by her work my entire life. And when I was thinking about wanting to work in and with community and what medium would best lend itself to that, textiles came to mind and quilting came to mind for me, partly because I had that, but partly because I think in comparison to more, again, quote unquote, fine art practices, there's less of a barrier to entry. I think a lot of people in community, a lot of non-artists say that they're not creative, don't have an artistic bone in their body, could never paint or even draw. They find that quite scary, and like that's something that other people do they couldn't do. But craft doesn't have that same weird aura, and I think there's such a widespread base of skill within the broader community in relation to textiles. So that's kind of how I decided to do that. And then once I'd made my first piece and started, borrowed a friend's sewing machine and tried it out, I had this weird moment where it was like in my bones, and it just made sense in this weird way where I was just like, oh, this is it. I don't need to do any other kind of art. Like, this is what I want to do. It just is already in here. It's already in me. So that's kind of how I got onto textiles.
God, that's a relief, isn't it? But I love that. It is in your DNA, isn't it? Let's face it. There's at least a quarter of you that's really good at this stuff already, just from a DNA standpoint.
I was going to say she didn't teach me directly, but I was able to. She taught all of her kids. So my dad used to help her out, and she used to have all the quilts out on the floor, and all the kids would help her out with it, and he'd fix up her sewing machine for her and stuff. So he was able to really help me, particularly in the beginning, and teach me how she would use iron-on interfacing to create her applique things and little techniques like that were really helpful. So I've inadvertently got some of those skills passed down.
Yes, I take it she was not around anymore.
She passed away a couple of years ago. She was 99 and a half. She really wanted to get to 100 and get that letter from the Queen for some reason, but she didn't quite make it. We lost her during COVID.
But that you did get an opportunity, though, was she aware of your emerging textile talent?
She was, and it was funny though, because she wasn't all together there towards the end, and I think there was a few moments where she was like, oh, I made this, and I was like, no, I made that. So it was this really nice kind of blurring of lines, which happened. But yeah, I did get to show her some of my early work, and I did have a show of our work together during the time that I was doing my PhD, where I had an exhibition that was half my work, half her work, side by side, which was really special.
Yeah, right. So what was the thrust of her work? What was her kind of narrative?
Her work was quite political too, actually. She's got some work in the same collection that I do in the Museum of Australian Democracy, and it's the work in that collection is called The Prime Ministers at the Marble Bar, and it's a portrait of all of Australia's prime ministers up to John Howard at the Marble Bar, which is a real place in Sydney. But you could, yeah. And she had this very funny sense of humor. So a lot of her work was quite playful, and she did these funny kind of character assassinations in her portraits. And her daughter was in the theatre, so she also did some work that was up as part of stage shows at the Sydney Opera House and stuff. So her work's stunning. I'm still nowhere near as good as her.
But it's interesting that then, so she's got an eye for sort of critical social commentary through textiles, and here you are just carrying on the traditions. Nice to reflect back on that.
There's no new ideas.
No, but I think that's great. I mean, I'm of an age now where I'm starting to realize that we do become our parents, and I'm starting to be worried about the bits of my parents I'm going to become. But it's quite nice to recognize that, generationally, you go a bit further.
Yeah.
Back. It's like,
it is a nice thread.
Good. And then, so when you sort of sat down at the machine, did it feel so I've said this before, when I'm doing podcasts, or when I started thinking about doing podcasts, it just felt like a really good fit for me. I don't know why. None of my family are podcasters or whatever, but was it the same sort of thing? When you started using the machine and you started doing this stuff, did you feel like you were just right in the right sort of body space?
Yeah, that's how it felt. It felt like it made sense, and I guess I am strongly influenced stylistically by my grandmother's work, but it's not like an identical copy, but I just felt like I knew how to do it, and I had all of her work to kind of go and look and learn from, materially. I could go and look at the quilt that's been hanging above my bed since I was born and like flip it over and be like, okay, what did she do here? And like, how did she figure out these panels? And like, what paint did she use? And how is she translating her drawings? So we've got lots of her drawings as well to her textiles, and what's the relationship there, and how is she cutting up this piecework, and what are the different kinds of ways she's stitching it down. So I could really learn from her. And yeah, I just felt like I had this very clear kind of roadmap, and that it was just weirdly easy, which I always love when I try new things.
It's also really satisfying, like because sometimes I think about this, like when I was a kid and just the things that were in my house were just the things that were in my house. They were there, I was in the house, ergo. And I sometimes look around at my house and I think this is the house where my daughters live. And so they'll see, you know, like I've got an applique portrait of James Dean that's up in the lounge or whatever, and that'll just be there. It'll just be that thing. Mm-hmm. So it's nice, I guess, to be able to look at that thing that's always been that thing above your bed, but then choose to understand it and choose to like analyze it. Because I think a lot of the time we just don't, do we? It's just that thing.
Yeah.
So I mean, it must have been quite nice to have like reframed again.
Yeah, when things kind of come into focus or come into your life at the right time, and they make sense in a new way, for sure. And I think that's one of the things I love about making art, is that these objects, things, material things we make from nothing that we bring into the world then kind of carry forward into the future. They're kind of these vessels that carry meaning forward and can reconnect or connect us into the future and into the past in these really fascinating ways that we can never totally understand. But I think that's such an amazing thing that art can give us, is a way to kind of extend ourselves beyond our lifetimes.
Yeah, future heirlooms, that sort of thing, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so PhD, craftivism. Mm-hmm. What's the takeaway? I mean, I know what the takeaway is. For everybody else, what's the takeaway? What's your thesis?
I guess when I was starting to, it was a practice-led research project, which meant I got to do kind of all these iterations and different projects to see, okay, well, if I'm going to be a craftivist, what does that look like? How does that work? What's the impact? And I think some of the early things I did was think a lot about the power of the gift, and the way that you can use gift giving to create reciprocity and community, and to leverage what skills and resources and access and time and your like kind of social capital, your social cultural capital, and translate that into some kind of action. So some of my early works were things like the International Women's Development Agency 50/50 project, where I made 50 projects for the first 50 people who donated $50 or more to this organization that supported women's development, particularly around the Asia Pacific region. And so that was just something I did through Facebook and Instagram, and it was a way to raise more money than I could donate myself. But the people involved in the project and I had a really nice exchange, and I made a textile kind of portrait just of their face and sent it to them as a gift to say thank you for making that donation. And that's a way to also like just build awareness about what this organization is doing. And so that was like an early kind of experiment in layering these projects with social, cultural, and like financial ways of making an impact. The next project I did was called the PM Please Quilt. I don't know if it reached you guys over the pond, but we went through a phase here in Australia where we had like heaps of prime ministers back to back, and and there was this moment in time between when Tony Abbott was the prime minister and then Malcolm Turnbull took over that role in a leadership spill, one of many. And there was this weird sense, because Abbott was so conservative and Malcolm was kind of so much more progressive than he was, where there was this weird kind of little moment culturally where people were like, oh, maybe it'll be okay now. And I wanted to kind of capture that and explore what that was. So I did this project where I used suit swatches and ties to make a big quilt that has Malcolm Turnbull's portrait in the center of it with his little dog. And I asked for people to send me kind of tweet length messages that started with the words PM Please. And my idea was like, these, we're supposed to be able to talk to these people. They're supposed to represent us. We didn't have an election. There was a leadership spill. What do you want to say to the new Prime Minister? So I collected 121 messages and I hand-stitched all of those onto the suit swatches. So this quilt has like 121 suit swatches stitched together with everyone's messages. And then my mission was to give this quilt as a gift to the Prime Minister, because the other thing I was thinking about was, yes, lots of us were tweeting about this and like, trying to get our point across and advocate for the issues we cared about. But you don't get much of a response from a tweet you send out into the ether. And I was like, what about if you give him like a really nice quilt, but it has all the same messages on them? What happens then? So the messages were, this was before we had we legalized same-sex marriage in Australia. So there was a lot of messages about legalizing same-sex marriage. There was a lot of messages about environmental issues. There was a lot of messages about the treatment of asylum seekers and refugees. At the time, Australia was illegally processing asylum seekers in offshore detention centres, which was something a lot of people were very mad about. There was stuff about the treatment of our First Nations people here in Australia. And then some funny ones like PM Please Stay Out of My Business. Or Please Tax Gina Reinhardt, our very wealthy mining magnate. So that was like a kind of very varied messages. One was like, PM, please come to Emerald for a cup of tea. And I spent ages trying to like figure out a way to get it to him directly. And I managed to get within like 1 or 2 degrees of separation, but I ended up driving to his office in Sydney and like handing it over to the people in his office. And then we had to deal with the whole like, you can't give politicians gifts, so then what happens to it? And it just like the process revealed all these really funny, interesting things that are barriers to how we can engage with our politicians. And I ended up gifting this quilt into the collection of the Museum of Australian Democracy, which is in Old Parliament House in Canberra. And they hung it up alongside the kind of generic letter that we got back from Malcolm Turnbull's office that said, thank you for making this quilt. But it hung up in the exhibition where they had all the portraits of the prime ministers in this museum dedicated to Australia's democracy. And it had all these messages next to this funny little letter. And hundreds of school groups go through there every year, and they got to see this work and think about that and think about how we have these conversations with our leaders and what people were caring about at that moment in time. So it's this really interesting time capsule in a way as well, looking back at it.
Yeah, and if you'd have actually ended up giving it to him, it probably would have ended up in a box somewhere.
Actually, I did, weirdly enough, like, my sister works at the like glasses shop where he went to get his glasses years later, and she had a conversation with him about it, and he really loved the work. But yeah, so it's funny how these things happen. And then from there, my work, probably my biggest project that I completed through my PhD was a collaboration with a US-based artist called Stephanie Dunlop, and the project was the UDHR quilt project. So if I can take you back, it's like 2016, and we just had Brexit and the Me Too movement and Trump's first presidency. He just came into power, and I got this message from someone I didn't know on Instagram saying, hey, I saw your PM Please Quilt project. Things are really hectic right now in the US. She's in Arizona. All these protests at the airports were happening at the time. And and she said, I've always wanted to make a work about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it suddenly feels really important to do it now. Would you be interested in working with me on this project somehow? And I said yes, of course. And I looked at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and realized it's like a 30-point, multi-page legal document. And I was like, this is going to take us forever to embroider. So I was like, maybe we can reach out via our social media pages and see if anyone else wants to help, because that'll make the workload a little lighter. And within about a week, we had enough people sign up to do, so we asked people to do just one of the 30 Universal Declaration of Human Rights points. And we had enough people to make the quilt 4 times over within a week. So we kind of took down the call.
Touched a nerve.
Yeah. And we ended up making 4. So there's 131 artists who represent about 41 different nationalities from 21 different countries who embroidered the Universal Declaration of Human Rights with us. Every one of those was on a A4-sized piece of fabric, and each artist was invited to, as well as the actual declaration itself, add some kind of imagery or extra text or whatever that spoke to a human rights issue that they cared about. So now these works kind of speak not just about the human rights themselves, but they kind of celebrate different human rights activists and bring attention to human rights violations that were happening around the world. And we were able in the end to use those quilts to raise 26,200 Australian dollars, which we donated to UNHCR to support refugees and asylum seekers. And yeah, that's a project I'm still so proud of. And that brought me together with a huge national community of makers who shared this kind of passion for human rights.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah. I'm always, I've never done anything with the gravity of that. I did do a thing called Stitch for Syria, where we cross-stitched a pattern based on a Lebanese design, made some really beautiful wall hangings, and we were able to take those to Lebanon. That was with the charity. But it never fails to amaze me where if you give people the opportunity to do good with their craft, so many people step up, don't they? And it's like, I even when I did this Christmas tree as a National Trust project, had like 600 baubles. That's another one of those, doesn't weather well. Don't put embroidery outside over winter. Doesn't weather well.
Winter's rough.
But just realizing, isn't it, like the time and the effort. I think with that project, it was like the National Trust. They tried to enter it, this particular place, as an award because they calculated the number of hours that people had spent on the project, and it was like 7,000 hours in total or something like that. If you, sometimes I think you can't stop and think about it too much because otherwise you just end up in bits all the time, don't you? Because it's just such an amazing thing.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, it just means the impact. I love these kind of big socially engaged kind of collaborative works because the ripples of being part of it and the number of people you kind of get to touch with these works is like so much bigger and broader. And again, you don't know how it impacts people or how these connections, what they'll lead to in the future. But so much has come out of that project, and so many people still. These works are also in the collection of the National Museum in Canberra, the Australian Museum of Democracy, MOAD. So they were on exhibition for over 2 years, and that's a place where all of the schools in Australia go on like a field trip. So they had this huge visitation, and we set up a craftivist library as part of the exhibition, and we had activations where visitors to the exhibition could do their own stitching and read about human rights in the library. And we made like pins and banners that we hung up as different activations through that. So they just, the number of people you can kind of reach with these projects is really amazing.